Ruth chapter 3, beginning at verse 1. Then Naomi, now let's reset our cast of characters here. Naomi, does anyone remember what her name means? Pleasant. Good. And what actress did we have portraying Naomi? Bette Midler. See, you stick something in there like that, and it helps you remember these things. Now, Naomi is speaking, of course, to her daughter-in-law, who is Ruth. And what does Ruth mean in Hebrew? Ruth means friend or companion. And the actress we had portraying Ruth was? Natalie Portman. See? Yes. All right. Now, we've got Boaz, who's coming in to the story right now. And Boaz is a near kinsman, probably a cousin, of Naomi's late husband, Elimelech. What did Elimelech mean in Hebrew? My God is king. Okay. What actor did we have portraying Boaz? Harrison Ford. See, the guys remember Natalie Portman, the ladies remember Harrison Ford. All right. So, but that's an important distinction because Naomi is an older lady and Boaz is of her generation. That's why Harrison Ford is playing Boaz and Natalie Portman, who is easily young enough to be his daughter, is playing Ruth. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative with those young women, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Therefore, wash and anoint yourself and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." I love the way the ESV translates this. Spread your wings over your servant. The Hebrew word there means fringes of the garment, the edge of a garment, or wings. And if we think about it for a little bit, we can see how the wing of a bird is kind of like the edge of a garment. In fact, this Hebrew word gets translated as edge of a garment or wings in several different places, sometimes even in reference to God. When Ecclesiastes says he spreads his wings over his children, it's the Hebrew word there, right? So, what is Ruth asking? I'm not sure Ruth knows. But Ruth is doing what her mother-in-law told her to do. Ruth is being obedient. She goes to Boaz and says, "Spread your wings over me." And we discussed briefly last week about how the edge of a garment, on the edge of a garment, the family's crest sort of pattern was woven in. It's kind of like a Scottish kilt, right? You look at a kilt and you can tell what family the person wearing the kilt is from because of the pattern on the kilt. In the same way, at this period in Jewish history, there was a pattern woven into the edge of the garment. They would often take that edge of the garment and press it into clay as a sort of signature. This is from the house of whoever. Right? And you could look at that and see the lines pressed into the clay from the thread on the cloth and see it like a signature. So when Ruth says, spread your wings, spread the corner of your garment over your servant, for you are my redeemer, she says, take me into your house. Now, we have to understand a bit of Old Testament, a bit of Torah, really, to know what this means. In the Torah, when a man has a son, his property passes to his son. The nation of Israel was divided among the houses and among the clans, so that your family always owned this piece of land. Always and forever. You could sell that piece of land for no more than 50 years. On the 50th year, all of that land came back to its original owner. So, this is called the Jubilee year. So, having a family was very important, and this passed down from father to son, from father to son. What happens if the father doesn't have a son? What happens if the father only has daughters? In Numbers, chapter 6, I think it is. I'm not certain. Numbers chapter 6, we read the story of the daughters of Zelophehad. That's a name you don't forget. Zelophehad. Zelophehad was a Hebrew man who had 5 daughters and no sons, and he died without leaving a son. His daughters go to Moses, and they say, why should our father's inheritance be lost because he produced no sons? Moses said, you're absolutely right, doesn't make sense. If you marry within your tribe, then the inheritance will pass to your sons. So, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, was very wealthy. He owned a lot of land. There was a drought in the land, and so Elimelech and Naomi left and they went into Moab, where they picked up Ruth and Orpah, but Orpah stayed in Moab. Ruth and Naomi come back, and now they have this wealth. They have this massive amount of wealth that they can't touch because there are no sons in the family. So Ruth goes to Boaz, as she is instructed, in verse 9, and says, spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. What does that mean? It means that Boaz is a near kinsman. See, if a man died without producing, if a man died without producing a son, the Torah said his brother should marry his wife and produce a son with her. Now, this does a couple of things. One, it makes sure the inheritance stays in the family line. But two, it also provides for the woman. A woman couldn't just go down to the local 7-Eleven and get a job. It was a different culture, a different time. A woman without a husband and without children to take care of her was impoverished. This is why we often talk of taking care of orphans and widows. Because orphans have no one to take care of them and widows have no one to take care of them. Now, that's not our modern society. That's definitely not America, but that was ancient Israel. Who is the man who marries his dead brother's wife? He is her redeemer. The brother dies without producing a son. His brother marries his dead brother's wife, produces a son. He redeems the inheritance. Okay? So Ruth says to Boaz, you are a redeemer. Verse 10, and he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, do not fear, I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. What does this mean? Well, we're about to add another character to the story. And in true fashion, we're going to stick with Jewish actors. This nearer kinsman. Now, what does that mean? If a man dies without producing a son, his brother can marry his wife. What if he doesn't have a brother? Well, then it goes on down the family line. First cousins, second cousins, like that. Okay? But it goes in that order. It goes from the near kinsman, the brother, to the first cousin, to the second cousin, in that way. This way, you can resolve property disputes. Elimelech has a lot of property that whoever redeems it is going to get. He's going to become very wealthy. Boaz knows that there is someone closer to Ruth than he is, someone who has a better legal claim on the property of Elimelech than he does. This nearer kinsman is going to be played by Danny DeVito. See, you don't forget these things once you hear them. There's the nearer kinsman who has a better legal claim. Danny DeVito has a better legal claim on Natalie Portman's property than Harrison Ford. All right. Kind of shows you what I think about the nearer kinsman as well. Verse 13. Remain tonight and in the morning. If he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until morning. Very briefly, because I don't have a lot of time. As the Lord lives is an oath. What he's saying is, I promise, as the Lord lives. See, the Lord who lives, the fact that the Lord lives is this truth. This other truth, I'm going to tie to that. Right? Like, I swear on my mother's grave. Well, I believe my mother, she's here and she's dead. And I love my mother very much. And I'm going to tie this next thing that I say to this truth. So that these two things are equally as important. As the Lord lives, I will redeem you. If he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until morning. The Bible is not against taking oaths. The Bible is against taking oaths falsely. And that's what Jesus was teaching. Verse 14. So she lay at his feet until morning, but arose before one could recognize her. Or one could recognize another. Then he said to her, let it not be known that the woman who came to the... And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. And he said, bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it out, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. And she went into the city. 6 measures of barley. What is this about? Let's see. Then she went into the city. Verse 16. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did you fare, my daughter? She told her all that the man had done for her, saying, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Now, pay attention to how Naomi responds to these 6 measures of barley. She replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. How did she know that? How did she get that from 6 measures of barley? Because Naomi is very, very Jewish. When Abraham and Sarah rested under the oaks of Mamre, 3 men came to visit them. These 3 men were agents of the Lord. They may have been God himself. They may have been angels. However, whoever they were, they came on a message from the Lord. And Abraham gave each of them a measure of barley. This was the fellowship offering. Boaz gives Ruth 6 measures of barley. 1 for each of the 3 men under the oaks of Mamre, and 1 for each of them again. Right? It's doubling down on his promise of fellowship. This is what Abraham did. I'm doubling down on that. So Naomi, who sees these 6 measures of barley, says absolutely he will not rest until he does it. So, chapter 4, beginning at verse 1. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. Harrison Ford, sitting at the gate, waiting for Danny DeVito. Now, why at the gate? Because that's where everybody came and went in and out of the city. Big important meetings were held at the gate of the city rather than in some courthouse in the middle of the town, because they wanted these things publicly known. Why? Because there really weren't court records, and most of the people were not literate enough to read them anyway. So, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Danny DeVito waddles up. Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and sat down and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. What do you say? What's the Hebrew word for 10 Jewish men? A minyan. The Hebrew word is minyan. And I have a Jewish friend who absolutely loves those little yellow things. He put 10 of them in a circle and he called it a minyan. But 10 Jewish men make a minyan, a sort of a court that can sit down and judge things, right? So, verse 3. Then he said to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here, and in the presence of the elders of my people, and if you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. All right, here Boaz makes his case. He knows that not only is the land riding on this deal, but Ruth as well. And so here we stop. We hold our breath waiting for Danny DeVito to respond. And I just sort of imagined him sticking a finger up his nose and considering it for a moment. And he said, I will redeem it. And we're crestfallen, because that's not the way the story is supposed to go. Verse 5, and then Boaz said, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, raising up a son for your brother's widow. Verse 6, then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Verse 7, now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging in confirmation of a transaction. The one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. And Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers from the gate of his native place. You are my witnesses at this day. Okay. What does all of that mean? Well, we are widows. We were married to God, but we sinned. We as humans sinned and gave up that which was our inheritance. Boaz comes riding into town. He's born in a manger from a virgin. And he grows up a carpenter in Galilee. and he teaches and he preaches. And we come to him and we say, redeem us. The Samaritan woman who comes to Christ and she says, heal my daughter. And he says, I come not to the people of the world. I come only to the lost sheep of Israel. And she pleads with him. She begs him and she says, spread your wings over me. Draw me into your house. And so each of us come to Christ, pleading with him. And he says, there is a nearer kinsman. There is someone who has a better claim on you than I do. There is someone who has a closer right to possess you than I do. See, this is why it's Danny DeVito playing the nearer kinsman. Because this person with the better right, this person with the better claim, this is Satan himself. He owns us. We have sold ourselves into his service with our sin. And Christ goes to Satan and he says, I will redeem them. And Satan says, I'll make you a deal. Bow down and worship me and I'll give you all of this. And Jesus says, no. Satan says, command these stones be made bread because you're hungry. And Jesus says, no. And Satan says, I will give you all the kingdoms of the world. And Jesus doesn't dispute his right to give them because they belong to him. Satan is the nearer kinsman. So what happens? Jesus pays the debt. He goes willingly to his own cross. He lays himself on his cross. Because he is able to do it. Because he has the right to redeem us. And in this act of self-sacrifice, in this willing submission to the ultimate plan of God, he takes the claim that Satan had over us. What happens then? Well, the church is often called the bride of Christ. You see how this all comes together. The church is the bride of Christ. He is our bridegroom. He has purchased us, Paul said, with his own blood. But there's more. There's more. Because see, we're no longer just widows. We're now being taken care of. We're not on our own. We're not impoverished. We have a benefactor. But there's more, because the land of Elimelech, of my God, the king, the property, the wealth passes to us. This is the story of the romance of redemption. This is what Ruth is all about. Now, the book is not nearly shallow enough to preach the whole thing in 2 sermons. So we just skimmed across the surface. The next few verses would take several sermons to get through, which is why I stopped where I did. But we are not our own. We have been bought with a price. We have been redeemed by one who came and gave up his own glory willingly because he loved us. One last thing, and then I'll close with this. I love Genesis so very much. I love the book of Genesis so very much. Adam was not deceived. See, here's the same story. It gets told over and over and over again throughout the whole of the scripture so that maybe we can see it. Eve was deceived by the serpent. Adam was not deceived. Adam knew what he was doing. Adam ate the fruit willingly. Paul tells us this. Adam ate the fruit knowing what it was going to cost him. Knowing that he was giving up his immortality. Knowing that he was giving up everything he had. Why did he do it? Because he loved his wife so very much that he was willing to give up everything for her. See, Adam knew that if he didn't eat the fruit, he would grow old and die. And that he would be alone again. And so Adam takes the fruit to redeem Eve by the sweat of his brow. In the same way, we who had sinned against God were going to die. And Christ, the second Adam, comes to redeem us by becoming one of us. Christ takes the fruit on himself. And in this purchases us for eternal life. It's a great little book. I love the book of Ruth. Let's remember that we are not our own, that we were bought with a price. Let's bow our hearts.